Well, first of all, before we get started, I need to say congratulations to all you Chicago Cubs fans out there, since it hasn't been mentioned. Congratulations. It's a great accomplishment. We're all rooting for you, other than those of you who are Cardinal fans in the house. I did hear that President Proctor and Terry Bolin will wear a Cubs jersey if the Cubs win the World Series. Is that right? I think that's what I heard. I also heard that it's been a long time since the Cubs have won the World Series, right? In fact, I just heard on the radio the other day that the last time the Cubs won the World Series was 13 days after the first car rolled out of the factory. That's how long ago it's been. But it's going to happen this year, no question about it. They are definitely going to win either that or they're cursed. It's one or the other. I'm not sure which one. I heard Cleveland fans are buying goats, though. That's what I heard. Some of you get that, some don't. So some time ago, there was a picture that went viral on social media. Maybe you saw it. It was of an intern who got a job at a tech company, and on his second day on the job, wanting to impress his bosses, wanting to make a good impression with his coworkers, on the second day of the job, he fell asleep at his desk. And all of his coworkers saw this, wanted to show their love and support, quietly gathered around him, and took this picture right here. Posted it on social media. It went viral, people liking it, commenting on it, retweeting it. Everybody saw it. And then they started photoshopping it, kind of making some adaptations to it. And so, a few of my favorites. You've got the Nicolas Cage version of the picture. Vote for Cage for president, right? And then you have the Hollywood Stars version of the picture. I like that one. That's pretty good. Ellen right there, front and center. Some of you might appreciate the Simpsons version of the picture. And I even found an OCC prof version of the picture. Check that one out. That's pretty good. We'll post that, all right? Because you want to study that closer, I'm pretty sure. We'll make sure we post that on social media. So back to the original picture. So if we were to have a caption contest for this particular picture, what should it read? Well, maybe we can adapt something that Warren Buffett once said, and maybe the caption would read this: "It takes 20 years to build a good reputation and only a 5-minute nap to destroy it." Maybe that would be the caption. Now, that's not exactly what Warren Buffett said. What Warren Buffett actually said is something rather profound and true for us. He says it takes 20 years to build a good reputation and only 5 minutes to destroy it. All of us face those 5-minute moments of testing. All of us will find ourselves in that place where, depending upon the decision that we make in that moment, in those 5 minutes, will determine our integrity, our witness, our testimony moving forward. All of us will face those 5-minute moments of testing in our life. I once heard a sermon that Bob Russell preached here on our campus where he was very honest and vulnerable, and he talked about a moment in his life when he was in a series of counseling sessions with a young lady, and at the last counseling session, they were walking out of his office, walking down the hallway, and out of nowhere, she made a pass at him and attempted to kiss him. And he said in that moment, he was just being very real and honest with us, he said, there was a brief moment in my mind where I thought about giving in. But fortunately, he fled the scene of the crime like Joseph with Potiphar's wife, and he resisted the temptation and he ran away. And this is what he said in commenting on that particular moment. He said, as I think about what happened, I realize I didn't pass with flying colors, but I did pass the test. What will enable us when our 5-minute moment of testing is upon us? What will enable us, empower us to stand and to pass the test when our 5 minutes of testing is upon us? Maybe you've seen the movie We Bought a Zoo. How many of you have seen that movie with Matt Damon in it? Great movie. Basically, the premise of the movie is that we all face these moments in life where we need to have courage and boldness, and depending upon what we do in that moment will dictate our future, and there's several illustrations of that throughout the movie, but one in particular stands out when he's with his children and he's talking to his children about how he met their mother, his wife, who had recently passed away, and he's describing that moment, that encounter when he first met their mother, his wife. He says that he was walking down the street and he passed a restaurant And he looked in the window of the restaurant, and there she was, sitting down at the table by herself, all alone, lost in her own world. And when he saw her, even though she was a complete stranger, he knew that he had to talk to her. He needed to talk to her, but he was afraid. He was, not something that he would typically do, talk to total, complete strangers. He said, what I needed 20 seconds of courage. 20 seconds of boldness. And so he told his children that he got that courage, and he walked into the restaurant and he stood right there beside her, 15 seconds left. And he just stood there, 10 seconds left. And then finally he spoke up and he said to her, why would an amazing woman like you even talk to someone like me? No more courage left. And then he waited, and she said, why not? And the rest was history. In his words, sometimes all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage, 20 seconds of embarrassing bravery, and I promise you, something great will come of it. Where will we find our insane courage, our embarrassing bravery whenever we are in that 5-minute moment of testing? No question, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel chapter 3 were faced with perhaps the most important 5 minutes of their lives. As the trumpets blared and as the music echoed through the valleys of Babylon, the reputation that they had built over a lifetime of faithfulness to the Lord was coming down to this 5-minute moment decision, these 20 seconds of courage and bravery that they needed to find from within. Now, last week, Larry Pachower introduced us to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel chapter 1, where they are newly introduced to the king's court, and they're given a new language, a new history, a new literature, a new clothes, and even new names. But then they were also told to eat a new diet, which they were not okay with, and so the three of them, with Daniel by their side, strike up a deal with the court officials. Listen, nothing but vegetable and water for 10 days, and I promise you at the end of 10 days, our God will be faithful to us. And sure enough, by the time you come to the end of Daniel chapter 1, God is faithful to those who demonstrate courage and bravery in the face of testing. And they developed a reputation for themselves, a reputation that would carry with them for close to 20 years until we arrive in Daniel chapter 3. In Daniel 3, they have every reason in the world to be intimidated. A tall, towering statue glistening with gold in the Babylonian sun on the plain of Dura, seen from miles away. No question, any one of us, upon seeing that tall statue, would have bowed in submission to it out of fear. They could have been intimidated by the crowds of people watching them, glaring over them, jealous of their reputation that preceded them. In fact, we know that these officials went to the king tattling on them. Long live the king, they said. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and to worship the gold statue when they hear the music. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, O king, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods. They do not worship the gold statue that you have set up. They could have been intimidated by the statue, by the crowds of people. They could have been intimidated, certainly, by the powerful king demanding them to kneel down before him. I will give you one more chance, the king said, to bow down and worship the statue I've made when you hear the sound of the music. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace, and then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? I remember when I was a kid, I was playing outside, and my parents had to run some errands, and they told me to stay playing outside. If I needed anything, Michelle, my next door neighbor, would be my babysitter, to go to her if I needed anything. And the last thing they said to me, if you at all are tempted to go into the house, resist the temptation. Under no circumstance are you to go into the house. If you need anything, you go to Michelle. Now, they shouldn't have said that, because as soon as they left, what was the first thing I wanted to do? Go in the house. So I went and I checked the side door, and it was locked. All right, they're smarter than they look. And so I went to the back door, locked. Front door was locked, but maybe not as smart because they left the front window cracked open. So I popped the screen off, and I pushed the window up, and I went head first into the kitchen, and I went straight over to the refrigerator, and I opened the refrigerator door, and inside was a 2-pound bag of M&Ms, slightly chilled. You know what I'm talking about? This beautiful thing. And I ripped open the bag and I reached in and I was just chowing down in the kitchen in front of the refrigerator door with it open, just chowing down on M&Ms when all of a sudden I heard the Buick Century pull into the driveway and the kitchen door open and there was my mother staring at me. I was caught red-handed and blue-handed and yellow-handed. And my mom said to me, "Did I not make myself clear? Did I not tell you, under no circumstance were you to go into this house, that if you needed anything, you were to go to Michelle, your next door neighbor? Did I not make myself clear? How do you explain what you have done here?" And I looked at my mother and I said, "Woman, I have no reason to defend myself to you in this matter." No. I did not say that because to do so would mean I would not be here today. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he does not, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up." Every reason in the world to be intimidated. And if the statues, the crowds, the king, if they weren't enough, then certainly the hot, fiery furnace blazing before them would have been enough for any one of us to buckle down under the pressure, to kneel in submission. But you know how the story goes. 3 men went in, and when they looked, they saw a fourth, like a son of God, hovering over them, protecting them. And when they came out of that fiery furnace, not only were their lives spared, but they had not even the hint of the smell of smoke upon their clothes. Certainly the point of this amazing story is that we serve a powerful and sovereign God who is faithful to his faithful people and makes himself known in the midst of our faithfulness. But there is an application that we can take away from this incredible story. We can learn something today from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when we find ourselves in the midst of our 5-minute moment of testing, when we need 20 seconds of bravery, insane bravery, and incredible courage. There's something quite profound, I think, that we can learn from these 3 men. When our testing is upon us, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego remind us that God never intended for us to stand alone, but God always intends for us to stand together. It is an undeniable feature of this chapter. When you read through Daniel chapter 3, you cannot help but notice that every time one is mentioned, the other 2 are standing right there beside them. Shadrach always has Meshach. Meshach always has Abednego, always together. In fact, not just a few times, but if you read through the chapter, you'll notice 13 different times the 3 of them are mentioned together, and a couple more times in chapter 1. They remind us that God never intended for us to stand alone when our testing is upon us, but he intends for us to always stand together as brothers and sisters, co-laborers in the gospel, friends in Christ. So here's some application for you today. When our 5-minute moments of testing are upon us, first of all, be intentional with your friendships. Be intentional with your friendships. Can I suggest to you on a very practical level that one of the more spiritual things that you can do during your time here on this campus is to give and to receive genuine friendships with others who will stand with you, who will go out into the world with you, a world ready to test and intimidate you. Jesus models this for us in his own life. "I no longer call you slaves because a master doesn't confide in his slaves. Now you are my friends." Florence Detler, when she turned 101, decided that she was ready for a new challenge in life. And that new challenge for Florence was to join Facebook, of all things. Right? So she figured out how to do it, and she joined the Facebook family. Well, it turns out at 101 of the 1 billion people in the world who are on Facebook, Florence was the oldest at the time. Mark Zuckerberg found out about it, was quite impressed with her, invited her to his headquarters so that he could give her a personal tour of the Facebook headquarters and also take a picture with her and his CEO. Here's the picture of Florence at 101. She was interviewed. The interview went public. Everybody watched it, and In one day, Florence received 7,000 friend requests as a result of that interview. 7,000 people around the world who said, Florence, would you be my friend? She said that she kept getting friend request after friend request. In fact, she said that she ended up getting carpal tunnel syndrome trying to keep up with all of the requests. Friendships are a valuable commodity. They're not only for your own good, but they're for God's own good. It's why there are close to 60 one another references in the New Testament. The most frequent of them, love one another. Because God knows that the formation of intentional relationships is one of the best ways that you can prepare for a life of ministry and service to the Lord. There are many valuable lessons that I learned while on this campus as a student, many valuable, incredible experiences that I was able to participate in while a student on this campus. But I'm telling you, one of the most valuable things that I took away with me was Drew Henderson and John Weiss and Brent Ashby and Doug Aldridge. And those friendships have stood by my side these 20 years of ministry, whether physically in my presence, holding me up, or holding me accountable from a distance. Invest in meaningful friendships and relationships. Don't let yourself opt out of such friendships by replacing them with virtual distractions and shallow acquaintances. Instead, take advantage of every opportunity that you have to develop friendships while on this campus, because God never meant for you in the world, as you do his work, to stand alone. But when our 5-minute moments of testing are upon us, he intends for us to stand together. So be intentional. Secondly, don't settle for loneliness. Don't settle for loneliness. There's a study that was conducted by Duke University which reveals that 1 out of every 3 people in our country are lonely. Now just think about that for a moment. That means the person sitting next to you, to your left, to your right, that it's a high likelihood that one of you is struggling with loneliness, that even in a crowd of people like this, you feel the weight and the burden of loneliness. There's a book entitled The All Better Book. Children are asked to answer some of the world's most profound problems and to give their childlike solutions to those problems. One of the questions that is asked of a series of children is this: in a world with billions of people living in it, how would you suggest we get rid of loneliness? Kalani, age 8, said, people should find lonely people and ask them their name and address. Then ask people who aren't lonely their name and address. And when you have an even amount of each, assign lonely people with not lonely people together in the newspaper. You like that idea? That's pretty great, right? I like that. Max, age 9, said, I know what we need to do for the lonely people. We need to make food that talks to you when you eat. For instance, it would say, how are you doing? And what happened to you today? That's pretty good. Now, I love a good steak, but could you imagine if a steak could talk to you? Like, how incredible would that be? But here's the one that breaks your heart. Brian, age 8, said this: sing a song, stomp your feet, read a book. Sometimes I think no one loves me, so I do one of these. The reality is this: on a campus like this, no one should feel alone. No one should be alone. No one should feel unloved. For God, the scripture says, places the lonely in families. No one should feel like they don't have someone to stand with them when their 5 minutes of testing is upon them, because God never intended that for us. Therefore, let us think of ways to motivate one another toward acts of love and good works. Be intentional with your friendships. Don't settle for loneliness. And my final point, be honest about your weaknesses. Be honest about your vulnerabilities, your struggles, your shortcomings. Often the reason we keep ourselves isolated and alone is because we're afraid that if we get too close to someone, they might see our wounds, our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, our brokenness. I wrestled with whether to show you this picture because it's slightly disturbing. But this is a picture of a Civil War soldier named Jacob Miller. Jacob, as you can see, was shot in the head, right between the eyes, and he lived to tell the story. It sort of reminds me, in fact, he lived quite a few decades after getting shot in a Civil War battle. Reminds me of my grandmother, actually, who was born and raised in Queens, New York, a short, Irish Italian redhead, tough as nails, never got her driver's license, just a true New Yorker, rode the city bus to and from work, the hospital where she worked as a nurse. One day she was standing on the curb waiting for the bus to pick her up, and the bus jumped the curb and actually hit her and ran over her. And she lived to tell the story. That's how tough my grandmother Bernice was. But that's nothing compared to this guy, Jacob Miller. Shot between the eyes, a visible wound for all to see. He even wrote about the story and wrote about the pain that he endured throughout his life as a result of that injury. It would be 31 years after getting shot in the head that the last piece of lead actually fell out of the wound. I wonder, how often do we try to hide the wounds that are upon us? The hurtful words, the painful experiences. And sometimes we do a great job at that, and we mask it and we cover it up, and we don't let anybody inside to see the pain that we've experienced, that we're feeling, the brokenness that we're struggling with. But when we get close to people, when we enter into what John Ortberg calls deep friendships, our wounds are made visible and are exposed, and it's painful and difficult. But it's necessary, because that's where healing is found, in those deep friendships where we're honest about our vulnerabilities, and we develop lasting friendships that will endure throughout our life. And when we find ourselves tested and tried, we have people who will come alongside of us, standing strongly with us. I think about my friend Miss Juliet here, who has an incredible ministry here in Joplin. And I'm sure that if she were up on the stage, she would tell you that some of the most profound experiences that they have in their ministry are when the women of her ministry are honest with one another, are vulnerable with one another, are broken with one another, and they form a closeness and a friendship that will enable them, when future testing comes and when the music blares and the trumpets play, that they will stand not alone, but stand together. Have you ever had any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Have you ever had any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Were your hearts this morning during worship not tender and compassionate? Then make me truly happy, Paul says, by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and one purpose. God never intended for us to stand alone, but to always stand together. A couple of Sundays ago, I was reminded of this quite profoundly. I get to serve at Carterville Christian Church on the teaching team. And so a couple of weeks ago, I introduced our new series on Elijah and Elisha called Prophets, Bears, and Axe Heads. That's the name of our sermon series. And so it was an introduction of the message and ministry of these prophets. And really the point of the message was for us to put our trust in the one true God, to not allow fear to determine our future, but allow trust in God to dictate our tomorrow. Will you trust in him, was the question of the message. And at the end of the service, our worship band led us in singing and shared the song, I Will Trust in You by Lauren Daigle. Have you heard that song before? It was a powerful, powerful moment for us. And when the service was dismissed, we invited people to come forward for prayer and for baptism if they needed it. We dismissed the service, but we said spiritual leaders are up here in front. And if you need anybody to pray over you, if you need to get baptized, you just come forward. And they came forward. For 30 minutes, our worship leader just kept playing on the piano as people kept coming forward, asking for prayer, broken in their lives, praying with spiritual leaders. And as you looked and scanned the room, you could see groups of 3 or 4 standing together, arm in arm, praying with one another. A young lady, 25 years old or so, came up to me just sobbing, weeping. This young lady, and she said to me, will you pray for my marriage? Will you pray for my marriage? And so I grabbed our senior minister's wife, and together we stood praying for this woman's marriage, praying for healing in their life. And as soon as I was done with her, a young man in our youth group, a teenager, came up to me and he said, I'm struggling with impurity. Will you pray that God would give me strength to overcome this struggle? And so I grabbed another teenager, and the 3 of us stood together praying with one another that God would give him courage and strength whenever his time of testing comes upon him. And there were people sobbing and weeping and praying to the Lord and crying out to him for strength and for courage. And I was reminded all over again why I love the local church, because every Sunday I get to worship and stand with people together holding each other up. We had baptism spontaneously happening in the background. One of my favorites, Brant, came forward, strong young man who started coming to church to play softball on the softball team. And he was invited by another member of the church, and he came forward, and he was weeping and crying and broken. And all he could say in the midst of his tears, I need baptism. That's all he could say over and over. I need baptism. And so his buddy went into the waters, and he was so jacked up, so pumped up, that his buddy literally body slammed him in the water and lifted him up out of the water, and they embraced one another and stood together in those waters. Even Jesus, on the night that he was betrayed, asked his closest friends to keep watch, to stand with him, to pray with him, and they kept falling asleep on the job. Could you not keep watch for just a little while longer? And in the midst of that whole moment in that garden, Jesus said something so profound and true for all of us. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. It's true. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. In our 5-minute moments of testing, our spirit is willing. Our spirit wants to be strong, wants to be courageous, wants to be bold, but our flesh is weak. And when we find ourselves buckling at the knees, that's when we need somebody else to come alongside of us. I imagine that there was a moment that Shadrach's knees began to buckle, but there was Meshach right there beside him. And when Meshach's knees began to buckle, there was Abednego right beside him. And when Abednego's knees began to buckle, there was Shadrach right beside him, making him strong again. When we are tempted to kneel to this world, may we be reminded that we have each other. And when Jesus faced his greatest hour of need, while the guards jeered him and the Pharisees mocked him and the criminals accused him, Jesus had a brother at his side. Today, he said, you will be with me in paradise. And at his feet, before him was his mother, being held up by his closest friend, the one whom he loved. Behold your mother, behold your son. Now, I don't know this for sure. But I wonder if he thought in his moment of dark despair, in his moment of great temptation, in his hour of great need, I wonder if Jesus thought to himself, oh, Father, I'm grateful that I don't have to do this alone, and neither do you. You are dismissed. As you go ahead and give someone a hug, all right?